Welcome back to episode 10. That's right, double digits. We've made it to 10 episodes of the Jungle Fever podcast, and we have plenty more to come. I'm Ethan Sargent. Ayden Crowley is alongside me, as always, in that nice collared shirt. He's a busy man doing
We're
doing
working.
his thing out in Evansville. I'm still over in Athens, and well, we do have a lot to talk about.
I was
Go
gonna say
ahead.
I like the Reds hat. They're balling
Yeah,
right
I
now.
figured it was
Come on now.
appropriate because, of course, we missed the episode last week because last Monday we were in Cincinnati, the two of us, as the Reds beat the Yankees, I believe 6-1 in the
Yep.
first game of that series that they did eventually win. They won the second game. Yankees picked up the third. I'm in New York. I'm a New York sports guy because I grew up in New York, but my father is was moved to and grew up a Cincinnati Bengals fan. So that's where the Bengals come from. But most other sports, I tend to lean New York. I do like the Reds, hence why I have a Reds hat. I own this hat. This is not like a punishment or anything. But I also figured it'd be appropriate to wear it today because they did beat my Yankees last Monday and in the series too. It's not
They're
like they
balling.
just sat on their britches and did nothing. They beat them pretty comfortably in game two as well, come from behind as well in extra innings. Great game, that second game of that series. But we got plenty to talk about for the football team in Cincinnati, even though the baseball team is doing quite well here in the month of June. Obviously, the big news that we didn't get to cover last week, really as it was coming out, was that Monday, Tuesday period of last week, was that the Bengals are to stay in Cincinnati. There will be no movement. There will be no new stadium. There will be Paycor Stadium, Paul Brown Stadium, whatever you call it. That's where the Bengals will be playing football for at least the next 11 plus years. So we'll talk about that. The Steelers have been very busy today. We're going to talk about what the moves that they made on both the defensive and offensive side of the football and how that affects the Bengals and the two matchups that they will play against the Steelers later this year, as well as the divisional race as well. And then, well, there was some big news that just came out maybe right around when that Steelers
An
news was
hour
coming
ago.
out about the trade. Obviously, the college football video game now has retaken over the sports sphere with how successful college football 25 was. College football 26 is less than a week away, I believe. Pre-order comes out on July 7th. The full game is on July 10th. So next week or so, people will be playing college football 26. But the big announcement is that college basketball is finally, for the first time since I believe 2010, is getting a college basketball game from EA Sports. They did release a little teaser, kind of like they did all the way back in 2021 for the college football game. So I expect it to be a few years before we see a college basketball game, but it is exciting to see. So we're going to talk about some Bengal player overalls. Obviously, we had some Bengals on this football team who were some absolute stars in college. There's national champions on this team. There's Heisman Trophy winners on this team. There are national record holders on this team, and not the guys you think as well. So we'll talk about some of the big overalls for some Bengals stars, both now and back when they were donning different college uniforms. So let's go back and let's talk the big story for the Bengals as of now is we're still about 20 or so days away from training camp, so we're not quite out of offseason mode just yet. But the big news is the Bengals are staying in Cincinnati. They are staying in Cincinnati. The new stadium lease has been signed until 2036. I'm going to read this directly from the Bengals release, which came out late last week on the 26th. This is all direct quote. Quote, the Cincinnati Bengals and Hamilton County have agreed to principal terms for a new lease that keeps the team in Cincinnati playing home games at Paycor Stadium through June 2036, with 10 additional options that could extend the lease through June 2046. This is the big paragraph, I think, for a lot of people in Hamilton County that are interested in the money side of it. The agreement supports a reasonable approach to modernize the 25-year-old stadium at a time where other communities are faced with multi-billion-dollar new stadium projects. The 470 million renovation project will maintain a best-in-class NFL stadium that attracts major concerts and events to Cincinnati. The Bengals will invest 120 million in the renovation project, covering 75% of new improvements to the stadium. The team in Hamilton County will continue to work collaboratively to secure meaningful funding from the state of Ohio to further support the renovation effort. So, the big thing, number one, priority number one, is the Bengals aren't going anywhere. And I don't think they were, even if this went way south, because of, a certain other Ohio team that may have left a few decades ago. But I think the big thing here is that the Bengals on the one side with their ownership group worked out a deal with Hamilton County so that they could improve Paycor Stadium. Because I truly think that that was the goal all along. I don't think that the Browns wanted to build a new stadium in some other county or even across the river. I don't think that that was ever the goal of the Brown family or of Hamilton County. I just think that there was middle ground that needed to be found, and maybe the Bengals front office should take some notes. They found the middle ground on this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's one of those things that's like, I guess it feels like this way with Trey. At least from our perspective, it feels like that way from Trey. If you want to make it about football, but in the sense that like both sides want to see this get done. Both sides want to put pen to paper. There was no universe that the Bengals move here. They didn't really want to move, unless maybe Hamilton County. And Hamilton County did not want the Bengals to leave because you think about what Paycor Stadium, obviously the football team, but just having the stadium there does. You think on the Eras tour when that came sweeping through, it came through Cincinnati and it was at Paycor Stadium. And guess what? There was people who paid money to be outside of the stadium just because that's what the Swifties are all about, and they love Taylor. So it's a revenue generator for the county. It's a revenue generator for the city. Obviously, the Bengals, they want to be there. It's their home. It's where they've kind of planted roots. There's a deep fan base that loves them. They just, to be honest with you, needed some upgrades because you look at other stadiums around the country and the Bengals stadiums fallen behind a little bit. I mean, that's probably the nicest way to put it. But it is desperate need for improvement. And stadium building, it's interesting, Ethan, because we both minored in sports management and we've kind of talked about this in our classes and stuff when we were in college. It's like, the difference in how teams approach stadium building has changed so much. They're making it so much more of an experience rather than just coming to the game, sitting down and watching your team battle. I mean, you think about how, like, I think of the Clippers and Steve Ballmer and what he's doing with that brand new state of the art stadium, the amount of technology and the amount of innovation that's pumped into that place. Or you think of, I mean, at its time, Allegiant Stadium, when it was built in Las Vegas, in their suites and how much luxury they built into that place. So it's just a different mindset. Obviously, teams are trying to, make as much money as they can at the end of the day with stuff like this. And so renovations obviously were a no-brainer for a spot that needs it. But they weren't going anywhere. And that's the thing, too, because you see this right now with the Cleveland Browns and them potentially moving outside of the city. Like, teams and organizations, I think, are just so much cooler and so much better when they're in the heart of downtown. You think of those drone shots on Sunday Night Football or Thursday Night Football, whatever primetime game you're watching, and you see the skyline, and then you see the stadium parked right there. Like that's what it's meant to be, in my opinion. Not,
I agree.
just, 15, 20 minutes away from downtown just because it makes more sense tax-wise or whatever. So that's
I
my
think
take on it.
you bring up a couple of really good points. Number one, I don't think Paycor Stadium could be in a better spot if anybody tried, right? When they first built Paycor Stadium, when they replaced Riverfront back in, what was it, right around the turn of the millennium, right around 2000, the whole purpose was to make downtown Cincinnati this bustling, vibrant place. And spoiler alert, it worked. The Banks is a beautiful spot. There's bars, there's restaurants, there's an awesome downtown spot down there where, they set up concert series. They do go out there before any big Reds game or any Bengals game, and it's always bustling, right? There's orange and black if it's Bengals. There's plenty of red and white if the Reds are playing. Especially right now with how the Reds are playing, right? They've had some great crowds. But that Yankees series is a great example. We went the Monday, but Tuesday, great player for the Reds. One of their top prospects, Chase Burns, comes to the league debuts. They pull 40,000 people on a Tuesday night, right? Cincinnati shows out for their sports. And
Absolutely.
so much of a big reason for that is because you have the Great American Ballpark, and then you have the Banks, and you have a bunch of bars and a bunch of restaurants and a beautiful spot where lots of people love to hang out. And then you have Paycor Stadium, right? And I really don't think was ever really impetus to move, right? Think about the amount of money that would have gone into building a new stadium elsewhere, right? That would have been, I'm talking 9, 10 figures is the money, the figure that would have cost to build an entirely new football stadium. And yeah, maybe you would have hosted a Super Bowl in 2034, but like what's the point, right? There was no reason to move. And I don't think that was, like I mentioned earlier, I don't think that was ever the goal. And you see, I'm glad you brought up the Browns because they are doing something similar. They're in a similar situation where they built a stadium in First Bank Energy, or now it's Cleveland Brown Stadium, down there with, right next to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And they've got a good downtown area as well. I don't think it's quite as interconnected as Cincinnati's is, but it's a good downtown spot. I've been to that stadium. But they have struggled with a few things, and now the Haslams want to move. They want to go to Brook Park. They want to build this. I believe they have a $2 billion proposal on the table for this new stadium that I know the Cleveland mayor is very adamantly against, which is going to be a whole nother thing. But
Yep.
you look at it, it's not just Cleveland, right? Chicago is thinking about building a new stadium out in Arlington Heights, right? We've seen the Raiders and Vikings both build new stadiums recently and open new stadiums recently. These are not, these are discussions a lot of owners are having right now because look, teams want to host Super Bowls. They want to, bring money into their cities and they want to have big time stadiums because they want artists like Ayden mentioned, like Taylor Swift. You want the big tour, like The Weeknd, who's doing his tour coming up here soon. Those are stadiums, right? That's a lot of money that goes into the pockets of these owners and these teams, right? It helps. Like a lot of jokes were made last summer about Taylor Swift, or a couple summers ago now, about Taylor Swift funding Joe Burrow's contract. It helped. Spoiler alert. Like it obviously didn't pay for the whole thing, but yeah, some of that money did help. So, and all in all, again, the big thing for me is that I'm glad that they sorted this out. I'm glad that the Bengals will be in downtown Cincinnati for at least the next 11 years. It may well be the next 20 years, because I mentioned those. So there's an 11-year period here where it's locked in until 2036, and then there are 5 2-year options built in after that. So every year after that, so 2038, 2040, 2042, 2044, etc. There are more options to increase the lease, and then and who knows what the world looks like in 2046. They may get back, they may have to get back together. But look, the other thing about this is it's widely acknowledged that the Hamilton County got one of the worst deals of any pro sport town during the Paycor Stadium initial, the Paul Brown Stadium deal back in 2000. The Bengals kind of ran Hamilton County dry. Like
Yep.
they got a great deal. And I think a big thing was this deal kind of moves it a little bit more. And I think the Bengals knew that they were going to have to do this. They had to swing the pendulum back towards the county a little bit. This deal is very similar to a lot of deals in similar sports towns. It's very similar to the deal in Baltimore. It's very similar to the deal in Charlotte, the other Queen city. It's very similar to those kind of types of cities and types of populations and types of counties that the Bengals are not only similar to in terms of football, but in terms of population size. So that's a big thing as well, I think, was getting that even. And again, compromise. It's the theme of the Bengals offseason, really. Compromise in one way or
Yeah.
another.
If you could sum it up in a single word, I think that would be the word
So
that you use.
look, I'm glad there's compromise, and hopefully next time we're on the show, we can talk about another compromise. Hopefully,
Oh, for
we got
sure.
about 3 weeks until training camp starts. Two guys right now, still right now on the outside looking in. Shamar Stewart doesn't seem to be budging. Nothing new on him. And then Trey Hendrickson. There was the news that they did allegedly open some talks, which is good. But we'll see if
Yeah.
the I do think over the next couple weeks, I think that they will probably get Trey done. I don't know what happens with
Right.
Shamar. I've
Yeah.
got
Ian Rappaport remains firm on his reporting that he believes the deal will get done eventually. He has said that time and time again, and he keeps saying that nothing has indicated that that's going to change. So let's hope Ian's right.
I
Shout
think
out
the
to
big thing is you really want him on the field by training camp. That's the big thing, right? You want to eliminate distractions. Orlando Brown, by the way, I got to shout out this because it's huge. Malik Wright, a guy who I love. I follow a ton of his stuff. The sit down is great. Did an awesome, awesome, awesome interview with Orlando Brown Jr. that I heavily recommend anybody who's watching this to go watch on your own. And Orlando Brown said that this is one of the tightest knit teams he's ever been on. They feel ready, right? The bonds are he said the bonds on this particular edition of the Bengals are stronger than they've ever been on any team he's ever been on. And he's been on a Super Bowl winning team, multiple playoff teams. So if you're getting that from a vet who has won a ring, who has been in some of the biggest games in any career, right? and look, Orlando Brown Jr., one of the more unique people, but also one of the realer people you're going to get. He's not going to sugarcoat stuff. He's not going to not tell it like it is. He's going to be real with you, and he's being honest. And I really do believe OBJ when he says that. And again, he's got a big year in coming, and I think that this Bengals team has a big year in coming. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the rest of this ends up, right? How do they sort through the next couple weeks, and how do they get to the big crux of the contracts that they're working through?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Orlando Brown Jr. also doing a little media lap this past week. He was on NFL Live. He was also on Sports Center. So it's just, I don't know, as a guy who grown up diehard Bengals fan, it's just cool to see because we were never in that spotlight ever, ever, ever. I mean,
Yeah.
we were, the butt of a joke 90% of the
Mm.
time on ESPN. But now to see, our guys in the off season and kind of these dead periods coming up and talking and maybe he's not talking about the greatest things right now, but talking about Trey and those situations. But
Yeah,
just to see that representation and to see us in the news that much, I think is really, really cool. But
I agree.
some other teams that
Yeah.
are around us have been in the news as well.
Absolutely. Well, just today, again, we picked the right day to record on Mondays. That may change in the
Smart
future. We'll
guys.
see. But Mondays seem to be the right day to record because it seems like big news drops every Monday before we record. Because the big news was today is that the AFC North got a little bit more interesting. The Pittsburgh Steelers have done a wacky trade with the Miami Dolphins
Nuts.
that involves three players at the core. There is some draft picks, but we're not going to really get into that because they're all day three picks. Um, Essentially, the new Pittsburgh Steelers, are tight end Jonnu Smith and cornerback Jalen Ramsey, and new Miami Dolphin, formerly a Miami Dolphin, then he went to Pittsburgh, and now he is back in Miami, is Minkah Fitzpatrick. So, Ayden, I will hand it to you first. Just an instant quick reaction on this and what it could mean for the Bengals.
Yeah, so this trade gets announced, right? And the initial reporting from Schefter was just that Jalen Ramsey was on the move, right? And you read that and you're like, man, that kind of stinks. As somebody, I maybe this is me looking through my Bengals tinted glasses, but I look at the way that the Steelers ended last year, and then I look at their additions this past offseason. Like the addition of Jalen Ramsey doesn't really move the needle for me personally. Just the question marks on the offensive line in terms of health. You signed however old Aaron Rodgers is at this point, who was coming off, yeah, he's 41 or 42, coming off I guess for lack of a better term, a terrible
It's
season
his
with the
his
Jets.
worst his
Yeah,
worst season
easily
personally.
his
I
worst
think.
season,
Yeah.
dealing with nagging injuries all the time. Combine that with the contract situation with TJ Watt. It's just like there's a lot of question marks with that team. Not even to mention that they might ask Ethan to play wide receiver two here if things get down to it. So
I
like
mean, gritty first guy in, last guy out type. That's what I would.
yeah. Lunch pail guy. So
Yeah.
like it wasn't really moving. It wasn't moving the needle for me personally. Now Jalen Ramsey, obviously, phenomenal football player, all pro guy, someone who's been there, done that. Maybe kind of in the twilight years of his career, a little bit past his prime. But don't get me wrong, the dude can still ball. Then probably about 10 minutes after that deal gets announced ish, the Minkah Fitzpatrick news drops, and I was sitting there like, whoa, that was my initial reaction because Minkah has been obviously TJ's TJ and he's defensive player of the year, but outside of TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick has probably been the
I agree.
best Pittsburgh Steeler over the past, 3 years
Yep.
since he got there, essentially.
Yep.
All pro guy, one of the best safeties in ball. Just he can flat out play. And I always think back to that picture every time I think of Minkah Fitzpatrick of Jamar Chase flipping the double bird to Minkah in that
Yeah.
game. Because,
Yeah.
hey, Minkah was getting under Jamar's skin because guess what? Minkah can ball too. So the fact that he was dealt in that deal was shocking to me because that's just, in my opinion, that's just a guy you don't let walk in that situation. Obviously, Jalen Ramsey being the All Pro, you want that in your building, but now you have a question mark of who's stepping into Minka's role.
So I have a very interesting theory about this trade. I actually think that the Steelers traded for Jalen Ramsey for him to play safety. I think he's going to play safety for them. And I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that is the right idea, but Jalen Ramsey is 32 years old, right? He is again, like Ayden said, probably not quite his former self, but there's still a good football player there.
Absolutely.
You've got Darius Slay, who obviously is also quite old. He's 34 years old, but he is a corner strictly, right? And then you've got a very good young player in Joey Porter Jr., who has shown flashes of being a really good cornerback.
Mhm.
So I really think that they're going to have Jalen Ramsey potentially play some snaps at corner, and they might shove JPJ inside. But I think that he's going to play a lot at safety. That's the thing that about Ramsey is he is very versatile. He could maybe they could even throw him at linebacker. I think he's big enough to play that position.
He can play some nickel corner for sure.
Exactly. And I think that they're going to do that because I mean the Steelers now have a very large void at safety that they just kind of made themselves, right?
Yeah.
Minkah was there, and now I mean I couldn't tell you who their strong safety is, and they don't now they don't have a free safety anymore. That was Minkah. So unless they and again I don't keep up with Steelers drafts quite like I keep up with Bengals drafts, so maybe they picked somebody in the last 1 or 2 years that they're really excited about that they want to move forward and maybe have them jump into a starting role. And if he does great, well, then the Steelers drafted well. But that's a lot of pressure to put on a guy who, again, I'm just making up this guy. He may not even exist. But that's a lot of pressure to put on a young player, right? And if there is no young player, then what's the plan,
It,
right?
it's
If what's the plan?
Yeah, it's similar to what the Bengals are doing right now with Trey. If they have some young guys step into that role, it's like, hey, by the way, we believe in you. Go replace Trey Hendrickson. It's like he just led the league in sacks. Like that's going to be a little tough. Minkah, not maybe to that caliber, but similar ball player in the fact that this is a Pro Bowler. And then
Yep.
for me personally, the Jonnu Smith stuff, him getting kind of sneaked in there at the end as well. I'm a big Jonnu Smith fan. You look at how he ended the season in Miami. He's a Pro Bowler this past season. I think he's a phenomenal player. He's someone that kind of fits that modern tight end role a
Yep.
little bit. Whereas, he's kind of that tight end receiver hybrid rather than, your inline blocker go maul at somebody.
Very similar. I think
Um,
he's a very similar profile to Mike Gesicki. I think
yeah. Yeah.
very, I think probably in terms of yards after the catch, one of the best tight ends in the league, maybe
Yeah.
besides Gesicki himself or Travis
Right.
Kelce in his
Right.
best years.
Yeah.
When he catches the ball, he can make things happen.
Yeah.
To the level that some of the best tight ends in the league can. Obviously, the blocking isn't the best skill of his, but they have Pat Fryermuth, who's very capable, and then they have Darnell Washington, who's just a monster of a human being.
They're still
So
waiting for him
I
to.
think the Darnell Washington stocks might be a little bit lower now if you have him in like a dynasty fantasy league or something like that. Might be time to sell off those stocks because clearly they don't buy into that as much. And this obviously this Johnny Smith stuff has been reported for a very long time. There was rumors about this happening for weeks. There were even some rumors about Ramsey for a long time with the Steelers. And I guess the last thing I'll point out about this is the Steelers are going all in, right? They are putting a lot of chips on the table here on this season, and I'm not sure if that's the right move.
Yeah.
Um, Aiden mentioned, right, you have a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers who is very clearly in the twilight of his career. Yes, he was an MVP just 4 or 5 seasons ago, but is that guy even still a thing? I don't think so personally. And you're putting a lot of eggs into the Aaron Rodgers basket. That's really what you're doing here. You are banking on Aaron Rodgers and DK Metcalf to form instantly a top, probably they need to form probably a top five connection in the league. You need DK to have over probably 1,200 yards, maybe more with their situation at receiver right now. You need who's the
Jalen
running back
Warren
they
to
drafted?
explode.
You need Jalen Warren to come to be good. You need who's the kid from Caleb
Caleb, Caleb,
Johnson.
Caleb
You need
Johnson.
Caleb Johnson to be good. You're banking on a lot of upside. You're banking on a ton on both sides of the ball too. You still got to figure out TJ Watt, who hasn't been at any offseason work so far because he is in the same boat as Trey Hendrickson, believe it or not. So I think you gotta. There's a lot of question marks, and I think it could go one of two ways. I think Mike Tomlin is putting. I think he's putting a lot on the line this season. If this goes belly up, it might be time. And
Mm.
it's a crazy thing to think about, but that if that streak ends, right? Obviously, Mike Tomlin's famous streak of never having a losing season, if that streak ends, what has Mike Tomlin done in the last 4 or 5 years to validate keeping him around? I, I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know, right?
And
And I know that
listen,
there's some Steelers fans out there. If somehow you stumbled into this and you're like, "What the heck am I doing on a Bengals podcast? Listen to Steelers." They're probably cheering for me right now because I know there is a large portion, maybe not a large portion, but there is a portion of Steeler fans that really don't want Mike Tomlin to be the head coach of that team anymore. So I don't know. I think you're kind of putting Mike Tomlin, proverbially in the poker game of the NFL, is pushing all the chips. He is
Yeah.
pushing them all in, and he doesn't have pocket aces. He's got
No.
probably an ace 10 suited. He needs
Yeah, he's
help,
a little, we'll
right?
put it this way. He's closer to 7-2 than he is for pocket
He
aces, in
needs
my
help.
opinion.
He needs
Yeah.
help.
And
He needs a really good
yeah.
river, right? And that river could be a lot of different things in the NFL world. But he needs help. And I think again, it the Bengals play the Steelers in week 7. We'll kind of see what the Steelers look like by then. We can know a lot about what this Steeler identity could be. That's a primetime game as well in the jungle on Thursday night. That's going to be a very
Yeah.
interesting matchup early in the season against
Yeah.
Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah. And just for the record, a rookie Jamar Chase went up against Jalen Ramsey in
Mm.
the Super Bowl and looked pretty good against him. So
So Jalen Ramsey gave up up until that point in his career, it was the most yards he had ever given up in a single game was that Super Bowl. Obviously,
yep.
T. Higgins had that big catch on him. Well, was that
Mm.
interference? But and it was one of the cooler Bengal moments of my life. That was an awesome play to set the tone there in the second half. But again, I think I don't know
Yeah.
if Jalen Ramsey's the same guy as well, and that's another
No,
part.
I'll put it this way, and I'll put it in the words of our good friend Zach Mothersbaugh, who just tweeted this out. And I love Zach Mothersbaugh. He's a big Steelers fan. He said, "I've never met a team that treads water quite like the Steelers," and I think that sums
That's
it
the
up
rec. That's
pretty well.
exactly what Mike Tomlin's record is. It's
Yeah,
treading water, right? They haven't
that
won a
sums it
playoff
up
game.
pretty well.
The last playoff game the Steelers won was against Matt Moore in 2018, which was the Miami Dolphins. The game before that was AJ McCarron, and of course the infamous Bengals game,
Yeah,
right? So that's their last two playoff wins. The quarterbacks of those two teams were AJ McCarron and Matt Moore. And those were, it will be by the time the playoffs roll around, it would have been 10 and 8 years ago with those last two playoff wins. So something's got to change. And maybe this is the year. Maybe it works out. And if it does, kudos to them. But if it doesn't, I think Mike Tomlin could be in big trouble. I think that I'll plant my stake on that. I think if it doesn't work out, I think Tomlin's gone. I'll plant that stake. I'll put that flag down here on June 30th, 2025. Um, well, we mentioned earlier, speaking of June, obviously a week from today, we will have college football 26, which is very exciting. I know Ayden's buddies on the PS5 have been doing a crossplay, or not a crossplay dynasty, just PS5 dynasty, because that wasn't a feature last year. This year, crossplay dynasty is back. So myself and some of my buddies on the Xbox will be able to join the PS5 crew. Very exciting times. I'll be the head coach of the Louisiana Raging Cajuns in 2026. Very excited. We've got a good squad for the 2026 season and beyond, and I can't wait. Ayden, I know he's done a lot of work on the college football 25 dynasty. I think he's at Penn State right now
yep.
doing things. But what's your team here for 2026 is for our dynasty?
Hey, we got San Jose State, right? So I started out
The
at James
Spartans.
Madison in 25. Yeah, went to Penn State. I'm basically James Franklin. I win a lot of regular season games. Playoffs roll around. We can't win the big one. We're trying to figure that out. But in
Well, look, if Penn
26,
State doesn't win the big one this year in terms of the real college football, and I know Mike Gesicki will be rooting for his Nittany Lions,
yeah,
as he is a former Penn State guy. But that brings us to our last point of conversation today. Is obviously there's a lot of Bengals on this team who had very illustrious college careers. So let's kind of take a look. I'll throw out a few players to start at some of the
yeah,
highest rankings. I guess we'll just chuck rankings out for I guess what they would have been in their last year of college, right?
yep,
Joe Burrow is probably about a 98 overall in his last year of college. Obviously, Heisman Trophy, national championship. Need I say much more? He shattered almost every college football quarterbacking record there was and took an undefeated LSU to the promised land in Baton Rouge and won the national championship. I think Jamar Chase is right up there, probably about a 95, 94 overall.
yep.
Bolitnikoff Award winner. He was just unstoppable in that 2019 season, him alongside Justin Jefferson. Little did we know just how dominant they truly were because Jefferson kind of played second fiddle to Jamar Chase in college. Obviously, now Jefferson has exploded at the NFL level, but he was pretty good at college. He wasn't quite that good. There were four receivers drafted before Justin Jefferson in 2020. Jamar Chase was the fifth person off the board in 2021. So Jamar Chase gets a 94. I'm trying to think of some other guys. Samaje Perine is going to be very highly rated. That's one I'll throw out there right off the bat. Samaje Perine holds the record for most rushing yards in an FBS game. Or I think it's most or second most. I can't remember if it was his record. I think he shattered a record that Melvin Gordon broke like the week before. It's like 250 something yards in one game, but he had quite that's a lot. There's actually a lot of Sooners on this Bengals squad. Right?
Yeah, there
Orlando
are.
Brown Jr. is an Oklahoma Sooner as well. So obviously formerly not a Bengal anymore, but Joe Mixon was also a Sooner. So a lot of Oklahoma representation.
Yeah.
Give me some. I'll give Samaje an 85 rating for his college.
Okay.
Give me some of your ratings
Yeah,
for.
I think somebody who, I mean, it's tough for him to fly under the radar, but I think T would have had a very high overall. You think about him at Clemson, I mean, he was an animal with those really good Clemson teams as well. Obviously, a first round pick for the Bengals. They identified him as a first round talent. I think he's somebody who could flirt with a 90 for sure, just given his size, his speed, his athleticism. And then let's show the defensive side of the ball a little bit of love. I think Jordan Battle was another guy who was really good in college for Alabama. I think he played really well. I don't know if he quite creeps into that 90 territory, but he's a guy who could be, mid to high 80s in my opinion. And then you just think about some of those guys that they have, like almost fly under the radar sort of people on the defensive side of the ball. Like you think about like a Logan Wilson coming out of Wyoming. Obviously, that's somebody that the Bengals like pounded the table for, but he's not a guy who jumps off the page quite like a Heisman or a Bolitnikoff in Burrow or Chase. So I guess if I could shout out somebody on the defensive side of the ball who maybe would creep into that higher overall area, it'd be that Jordan Battle guy.
Yeah.
But Ethan, for you, I am curious because you think about Burrow's career, obviously, and his time at Ohio State and everything. He's somebody who you wouldn't really think, like, if we're playing the whole college football game, right? He's somebody
Mhm.
who's end of the bench at Ohio State. He's probably rocking a 78 overall over there, right?
Yeah. Well, like I think of like if college football had existed, if they'd done it every year, right? If they
Right.
had not stopped at 2014, they just kept going, right? You think about a guy like Shamar Stewart, who was the ninth overall recruit in the
Mhm.
2022 recruiting class to Texas A&M, was at Texas A&M all 3 years. You'd think if college football 23 had existed, Shamar Stewart would have probably been about a 78 overall freshman with like 99 potential rankings,
Not
right? He
gonna
could have,
lie.
if you had played that, he would have gone way up. Obviously, the numbers didn't quite play out for him like he maybe would have wanted, but he still probably would have been somewhere in the 80s by the time. I mean, if you could check last year's game, Shamar Stewart would have had a legitimate rating. I'm not sure what it is off the top of my head, but he would have had a probably somewhere in the mid 80s, I think would have been my guess. Think a couple other interesting Bengals to think about in terms of ratings. How about Amarius Mims at Georgia? I think he would have had a very high ranking in terms of some of those intangibles. He would have probably had a very high strength rating. I think Amarius Mims would have had a very high rank over at Georgia. On the defensive side, I think of like Trey Hendrickson would have been an interesting one because he actually, it's interesting. His junior year at FAU was his best year. He had 13 and a half sacks, 15 and a half tackles for loss at FAU. The stats kind of went down his senior year. He only had 9.5 sacks only, right? Still pretty good. Still
Yeah.
drafted in the third round by the Saints. But he probably would have been about an 87 overall in CFB 16, and then he was drafted in 17. So I
He's
think
a
that's what.
sleeper. He's one of the guys, you're
Yeah,
playing,
yeah.
you're playing head to head with your buddy, and all of a sudden he picks FAU, and you're like, what are you cooking right now? Like you just don't know about Trey, man. He's coming off the edge,
Yeah.
13 and a half sacks. So
Geno Stone at Iowa is also a really interesting one because Geno Stone was a seventh round pick, right, to
mhm.
the Baltimore Ravens. He had a decent career at Iowa. I believe he had, I think, four interceptions throughout his career. Was a player at Iowa for a long time. And then obviously he's been in the league for a minute now. So Geno Stone would have been an interesting one to grade. I probably would have been in the mid-ish, maybe lower 80s, like 82, 83 overall, probably during his final year in college. How about Evan McPherson? This is an interesting one,
Oh,
right? At Florida, he hit some big time kicks for the Gators throughout the season. Obviously, his last year was that COVID year. I think what most people forget about McPherson is him missing that kick in the fog in the swamp against LSU, which again, another Bengal, Marco Wilson, was the yeah. Remember, he's on the Bengals. He is yeah, he decided to chuck the shoe, and he ended up costing Florida the game and probably a shot at the national championship that year, for being 100% honest. So that would have been a very, I think McPherson would have been probably the highest rated kicker in CFB 20 if that was a thing. He was, obviously the first kicker off the board in the 2021 draft to the Bengals. So again, hopefully he could turn it around and look like he did his rookie year. I'm
yeah.
hoping that he can. What about Ryan Rico at BYU? That would have been
Yeah.
a
I mean, all I know is that Ryan Rico, his
he
kicking
could kick
power
the
would
ball
be
pretty dang far.
99. He's someone who comes in and he's got 99 kicking power. Maybe the accuracy for him in college would have been a little low, but hey, that dude, I mean, if you need to
Hey,
flip the field,
punter, right? If sometimes you just need a punter that can flip the field, right? And I think if you look at all the Bengals rookies last year, obviously they did have some rookie step up. Rico was up there in the top three.
yeah,
In terms of they found a guy that remember they drafted a punter, Brad Robbins, just a couple of years ago, and they cast him off for Ryan Rico, and that proved to be a great decision. So I'm excited to see what Rico can continue to
yeah.
develop and prove this year. How about Jake Browning at Washington? This will be the last one we'll do. He had a that
No,
that
he was
I
a
don't know how
baller.
much you remember about that
He was a
Washington
baller.
offense. They were special. That was a really, really dynamic offense that he had that year. Probably the most dynamic Washington had until Michael Penix rolled along with that offense they had that went to the national championship a couple years ago. So Jake Browning probably would have been like an 85-ish
Yeah.
overall. I could see in his last year of college, maybe even a little higher
Yeah.
with what he was able to do with some of those. Give me one more, Aiden, and then we'll wrap things up.
Oh. I just also think of you saying Stewart kind of made me think of Miles Murphy, just
Mm,
because him at Clemson, obviously, he's somebody who was touted as a really high potential guy, an enormous ceiling, just given his size and his strength and his speed and all that kind of stuff. And so I think he's a guy who, again, kind of similar to Stewart. Obviously, the numbers didn't really flash for you, but he's somebody who I think just based off his athletic score and all that, I think he's somebody who could grade really highly. But this is peak offseason. This is what it's all about.
yeah, absolutely. And I look, next week we're going to have real college football 26 stuff to talk about. So, we might, who knows, right? Maybe we'll just start with that early. But we will have a Bengals season eventually, I promise. And we are getting closer and closer. We are less than 10 weeks away. Can you believe it? This past Sunday was
It's
10
nuts.
weeks until week one. So
I'm so ready.
if we can stay on track and do episodes every week, we will be at episode 20 by the time the season gets
Oh,
going, which I can't wait for. I'm excited for another season of Bengals football. They got to set the tone early this year, but if they can, and we'll see how they do once training camp gets going. I know we have a lot of stuff planned, talking about a lot of the big things. There's going to be a ton of huge position battles that the Bengals will have throughout the course of training camp. We might preview some of those over the course of the next couple of weeks before training camp does get going in just about 3 weeks' time. Right towards the end of next month is when guys will get back in that building, and we will get very, very close, dangerously close to football season. But that'll do it for this edition of the Jungle Fever podcast. For Aiden Crowley, I'm Beneath Sergeant. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.